Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Madel, joined as always by Chris Bouguet. Hey, Chris.
Hi, Rachel. How's it going?
Good. What are we talking about today?
Well, if you remember our last episode, I think we left it on a cliffhanger. It's like one of those Marvel movies where there's a stinger at the end and you're like, you can't wait for the next movie because it's like, okay, you left us on the edge of our seat. You know, what's the outcome? And so if you haven't listened to the last episode, go back and listen to the last episode where we do our ATIA recap, ATIA 223 recap. And what we say at the end there is that there was sort of a theme, a heavy theme, a lot of conversation on one particular topic, Rachel.
Gestalt language processing and AAC.
Yes. I don't have enough fingers to count, or toes really, to count the number of conversations people came up to talk to me, talk to you. I mean, literally got off the plane and got to ATIA, and I was in a conversation about Gestalt language processing. And I even on the ride home, like on the ride back from the airport, I was in a conversation. I shared a ride with somebody. That person was talking about Gestalt language processing at Ed Camp. We knew it was going to be on the board for people to talk about Gestalt language processing. And sure enough, there was a giant circle of people. There were multiple presentations on it, one back to back, right? Like on the day, there was one at like 8:30 to 9:30, and then there was another one from 9:30 to 10:30. So I think that was a really big topic. And like I said at the end of the last episode, it was big in 2022, a lot of people talking about it, but I feel it was like even 10 times as big. It took up that much more time, people discussing it.
Yes, I think that it was what everyone was talking about in downtime, in between sessions, in the hallway. You know, there definitely was a lot of buzz and talk about this topic, and it was interesting to see. It felt like, you know, last year it was definitely talked about, but this year was just like, it took over ATIA. It took over all the conversations at ATIA. Yeah,
like literally, like you said, like every hallway conversation, anytime you sat down to have a meal with somebody, the topic came up. But now trying to summarize it for everybody is, I feel like responsible, right? Like maybe you and I share this responsibility to come back and share to the podcasting community here. Like, well, okay, well, what were the conversations? What were they saying? And the phrase that keeps coming to my mind to kind of summarize it is that there's a healthy skepticism. That's how I felt. If I had to wrap it up into a phrase, I would say healthy skepticism from all of these people that attend ATIA, that are this extended community, dare I say family of people, that were coming together being like, what do you think? Because I have some thoughts, but are they what you think? Are they what I think? Okay, I have some questions. Have you wondered the same things that I'm wondering? And there was a lot of conversation around sort of, again, healthy questions about about this whole phenomenon that has sort of erupted in the world of AAC.
Yeah, I think that everyone definitely was having those conversations, and it was interesting. I kind of zoom out and think about what those conversations looked like. And I think everyone was kind of like walking on eggshells a little bit, like, here's what I'm wondering. What are you wondering? And then it was like, when you realize someone was wondering the same thing as you or had similar questions, and it was like, okay, like we can dive in here, which is interesting to think about, you know, because it does feel like, you know, there's a lot of messaging around Gestalt language processing and AAC. And yeah, I think that it was just like a collection full of people who are very passionate, I would say, about AAC assistive technology and have been doing this work for, you know, their entire careers oftentimes. And this new kind of thing that everyone's trying to wrap their heads around. And yeah, I mean, I think that just having questions makes sense, right? This is a new thing that everyone's hearing about and learning about. And I think that, you know, I myself have, you know, had a lot of questions come up in my own clinical practice and mind, listening to what I'm listening to, learning, being open to trying to learn new ideas, and also taking what I have learned and know to be true about AAC and what we teach, you know, on this podcast and what we teach during our presentations, Chris, and trying to kind of reconcile some of the questions that come up in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Something you said there, I just want to dig into it a little bit there, Rachel, because I certainly felt that way as well, is that when those conversations emerged, that walking on eggshells feeling, I definitely sensed it. And maybe I sensed it a little less than you. I don't know exactly, because of the podcast episode where I mentioned in last week's ATIA summary how one of the big takeaways I had from ATIA, that when we do our year-end reflection, people listen to the podcast and there's the number of downloads, and we look at those number of downloads, and we might think that means that's the most popular episode because people like the content, but that's not necessarily true. People listen to the podcast multiple times or download it and share it to get to study it. And that episode, those two episodes in particular, multiple people came up to me and you, I think, right?
Yeah.
And said, we listened to that episode multiple times. Like, they didn't always use the word multiple. Some people said, I listened to that episode 6 times, trying to dive into what is being said and how it's being conveyed. But so that's one phenomenon. But then also the walking on eggshells piece that you talked about, I had multiple people be trepidatious about going on to social media and asking any sort of questions around Gestalt processing for fear that they might be shouted down or ostracized or in some way, look, you're not on board, therefore you're against neurodivergent affirming practices, right? And so that's why I then they, as we got into it, it became more comfortable, and we dug into why was there this walking on eggshells feeling. They sort of summarized that, well, if I've experiences where they've gone into certain Facebook groups or they've posted something online where it has been like, it didn't feel like people necessarily were having that healthy conversation around it. They felt scared to have a conversation around it.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I think that it's been interesting to kind of, like, again, zoom out and look at what information has been shared and the mediums in which it's been shared. And I feel like you bring up social media, and that's kind of a big one where people are gaining information, which some level, I love the idea that it's so accessible, right? Like, information being shared on social media can be, a really great tool. And I use social media a lot. I know you use social media too, Chris. We all kind of use it. I think what's challenging is when you're having conversations specifically online. I think it's just hard to have like a professional dialogue. And I think that, there definitely is this kind of culture now where, it can get really vicious on social media. And I think that even myself, like, I get, nervous sometimes to post certain things or to have a certain perspective or share my opinion, for fear of like someone coming at me. Right. And like, I think that's really problematic, because when we are embarking on a new idea, and trying as clinicians to figure out how to wrap our heads around it and how to actually potentially shift our practices, we need to have healthy dialogue around it. Like, we need to be able to have professional conversations with each other where, we can ask questions and we can challenge things, right? Like, challenge these ideas in a healthy way. And so, I definitely reflected a lot on ATIA and reflected for myself on like how I, have been approaching this. I'd had some really great conversations during ATIA with the ladies who actually presented on the topic of AAC and GLP stuff. And I've been trying to figure out like, how can we create a healthy conversation about this topic, because I think that's really what our field needs to really move forward and to kind of adopt some of these new ideas and also potentially challenge some of them based on what we know to be true about AAC. So I think that that's where I'm kind of wanting our field to kind of come together and figure out ways to have healthy conversations. And it definitely feels like we're not there yet.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it because it's an interesting question whether it is specific to this feeling that people are having and what you just described as having healthy conversations is unique to GLP, or is it the same thing that happens with other phenomenon? I don't remember, or I don't necessarily feel that around like the specific language system first approach. I mean, there's some people that over the years that didn't sit well at first, and that seems to have died down, but I felt like the conversations were always healthy around it. But can we look to other phenomenon over the course of let's say the last 30 years of AAC and speech language pathology? Do you know what I mean? That where it does there's this sort of combative feeling at first. I don't know. That's a question. I don't know.
Well, I think that we've talked about on the podcast before, this idea of cognitive dissonance, right? And not wanting to acknowledge or admit that, I've been doing it wrong, or like, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And I just think that there's people who really get stuck in not moving forward. And I think a lot of times, Chris, we're on this podcast really advocating for people to open up to new ideas and to evolve into, the current state that we're in, instead of being stuck in what we were always doing in the way that we were always doing it. And I think that, having that evolution is really important, but the way to get to that evolution is through really rich conversations and really being able to wrap your mind around, what was I doing? Now, what is the information I have at hand, and how do I integrate what I know now, and move forward with that, and figure out what feels good to me and what sits well with me and what maybe doesn't, and figuring out how to reconcile those things too. So I think that, for me, it's just like, I've been really eager to have conversations with a lot of different people and figure out what they think about, gestalt language and AAC. And I've also been, tweaking things in my own practice and seeing what happens. And, I think it's just like a process, and having the ability to be open to new perspectives, have as many conversations as you need to have with whoever you need to have them with, to kind of figure out what feels good to you and what you want to tweak or change, and then being able to move forward in a way that isn't definitive about this is exactly the way that, I think everybody should do it, instead of that, being more open with the fact that we don't know, right? Like, I can't say anything really with definity at this point, because I just don't know enough. Like, I haven't been, trying things and having as many conversations. And I feel like we're kind of in this place, right? At least I feel like I'm in this place with gestalt language processing and AAC. Like, I haven't been able to kind of get as much information and integrate that information enough to say really anything with, pure confidence. It's all kind of like, well, here's what I'm seeing and here's what I think, but I'm not really sure, and I think that is like, it's a healthy level of trepidation, I think is a good word, when we're thinking about this topic. And it's been really interesting to navigate as, time goes on.
So just to make sure I understand, because I think what I hear you saying is it aligned with what I'm sort of witnessing in what I see in social media, and certainly what people, again, back to what they were saying at ATIA, is they might see an Instagram reel from somebody that says, this is a gestalt language processor in stage 1, and therefore I did X, right? And that's where a lot of the questions were like, well, wait, why? How do you know that? And why did you do that? And you're saying, like, if I didn't do that, then maybe I did something wrong, or should I be thinking that way, that maybe I'm doing something wrong? I want to keep my mind open, but in a 30-second spot online, it's hard to really ask those sorts of questions. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so.
So maybe here to wrap up this conversation is, what were some of the takeaways from ATIA? I really like to again, if our responsibility as the podcast host of the Talking with Tech podcast is to share with the listeners a summary, I think one, clearly what you just said is let's be open to dialogue and try and have healthy conversations. Watch for instances online where it's not, and reflect on how it could be better. And then secondly, specifically around Gestalt language processing, again, with this healthy level of skepticism, are you, as a listener to this podcast, do you have a healthy level of skepticism around it? That doesn't mean outright reject it. It doesn't mean accept it all at face value. It means, are you asking questions about how, just what, Rachel, what I heard you just say about your own practice and how you can integrate on what you think you already know?
I also think, Chris, that there's this, I think that the real challenge is when we think about AAC, it already is a topic area where many clinicians feel overwhelmed and daunted, like they don't know enough, right? And then we take Gestalt language processing, which is another area where people are like, oh my gosh, I need to know about this thing. Like, what is this thing, this new thing that I need to know about? And then we're combining two things that people don't feel like they know a lot about, and we're putting them together into this massive thing that nobody really knows about. And I think that we just have to be careful with the conversations that we're having, and I'm a big fan of asking more questions than I am telling people, what I think and what to do. Obviously, I can give examples of things that I'm doing, but at this stage in the game, I think that asking the right questions is more important than, figuring out trajectories and things to do. And again, I understand people share their clinical experiences, and I think that's valuable, but also like sharing them as just one idea, right? One idea that you could think about. And those questions I think are really important to think about. I'm thinking about, when we talk about PECs or picture exchange, I'm always advocating for people to think about specific strategic questions when we're thinking about PECs. Like, does it support motor planning? Can you model language on PECs? It's like when you start asking the right questions, people start opening up their minds to new perspectives and start challenging their own beliefs, right? And I think that if we ask the right questions in any given situation, there's a lot of reflection that can happen and a lot of processing that people can do. So I think it's like figuring out how can we ask the right questions. And again, I think that then that opens up a really great, rich conversation professionally about all these ideas.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I have two final thoughts, Rachel. The first one is if people did want to know something definitive here, that you could, I think a conclusion that many of the conversations landed on was, well, what's sort of our takeaway here from ATIA? Like, what are we, the people that go to ATIA, who's been working in AAC for ages and ages and ages, this extended family that I mentioned before, what do we feel like is a universal truth, an AAC agreement, if you will? And so I'm not prepared to generate a statement, but a sentiment, I think, was you could treat echolalia like key vocabulary. What I mean by that is you probably are not going to go wrong. You're probably not going to hurt anybody and probably help a lot of people if someone was verbally using a phrase. I won't even use the word gestalt. Let's just say a phrase, and they were using that repetitively. You could maybe program that phrase into an AAC device to show somebody that you're respecting their communication. I think I've heard you say you've done that in your clinical practice in the past, and it has been a door to that someone could walk through as a bridge. Like, oh, this thing is purposeful for me. This thing is, people are respecting me. Maybe I can use this in some way, right? Where that was not necessarily used. That wasn't demonstrated by the individual before. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. And I have done that in my clinical practice, and it's been very successful.
Yeah. So in the same way that if someone really had, when I say key vocabulary, people go, what's that, Chris? A fringe vocabulary word, a very obscure word but really might be important to somebody. Well, if someone really we talked about the Buffalo Bills back in the Disney episode. Let's say, Buffalo Bills was really important. Well, it probably doesn't need to be programmed in most people's devices, but if it is in your family, you might program it in yours. So that's a fringe vocabulary word that you might add because it's key to you. Well, a phrase that someone uses all the time might also be key to you. So you probably are not going to do any harm by at least putting that on there, even if you're not into or understanding yet or not sure what questions you should even be asking. That's at least one, I think, a general takeaway that anyone listening to this podcast who has at ATIA in any of those conversations be like, yeah, that's right. That's what we concluded. Is that fair?
Yes. I also would add to that, Chris, the two things. One, really following a child's lead and letting them kind of lead with whatever communication they're giving us and really responding and acknowledging that, which kind of goes into what you were saying. But I think that really this idea that we are modeling language with the hopes that the students that we're working with will then pick up that language and start using it. I also think investigating when students appear to be kind of using delayed echolalia, investigating what the intention behind that is. And that for sure, for me, has been one of the biggest aha moments of, learning about Gestalt language processing is, really doing the extra steps it takes to talk with the family, to watch that specific clip on YouTube, to listen to that song, to ask the right questions about when the student first started using that and in what context they use that, script, and then figuring out ways so that a student is not stuck in that and they can actually communicate with a new phrase or gestalt that is, has more intention and is universally understood by a communication partner. And I think that is another really important thing that, I will admit, I wasn't always acknowledging the delayed echolalia. I was taught to just redirect or go somewhere different and I would have parents say, well, that's not functional. They just script from, Toy Story. And so now it's really opened my eyes to all communication is meaningful. And, it's our work as clinicians to really get to the bottom of what's going on here. What is the communicative intent behind this? And so I think that is one of the other big takeaways that I think we can all agree on.
Yeah. I'll just end by saying, first of all, well said. That was so well put. This will probably not be the last time you hear us talk about Gestalt language processing on Talking with Tech podcast. That said, would you agree that we wouldn't want this to turn into the Gestalt language processing podcast, right?
Right.
Right. Because it's certainly a big topic. A lot of people are talking about it, are wanting to learn more about it. We want to help guide our own practice and help others through it. But we wouldn't want it to be the entire focus of our podcast. But it won't be the last time you're going to hear some more about it. We have plans, yeah?
Yeah. Definitely. We have plans to have more conversations. And I think it's just, that's the nature of where we're at in this kind of evolution, right? Is that we have questions and we have to kind of figure out how to navigate this new space. And I think getting a lot of perspectives, it's our duty, Chris, I think, to bring different perspectives to the conversation and different questions that we've been hearing. And I'm excited to share all of those things and excited to open up really rich professional dialogue around these topics that we're all trying to navigate the waters of.
Well, speaking of sharing perspectives, I know that one thing that we do on this podcast is we feature AAC users, and I believe that's the interview today.
Chris, I had the pleasure of interviewing Noah Callan, an AAC user based in Australia. And Chris, you actually were able to join us. So I had set up a interview with Noah, and when I got there, he was like, but where's Chris? And so I ended up texting you and I was like, hey, I know it's kind of late on the East Coast right now, but are you open for just saying, a little hello to Noah? And so you ended up coming on, saying hi, staying for a little bit. So anyway, we had a really awesome meet and greet. And Noah just was fantastic in all the wisdom he shared about AAC and his ideas. And I'm really excited to share his interview.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana Zabala, and I am one of the daughters of Joy Zabala. My mother was a pioneer in the field of assistive technology and a tremendous advocate for ensuring that educational experiences were designed to be inclusive, equitable, and accessible. Throughout her life, my mother understood that mentorship of the next generation was essential in order to realize enduring, sustainable change. To further my mom's work, her family, friends, and colleagues created the Joy Zabala Fellowship. Inspired by my mom's passion for empowering emerging practitioners, the fellowship supports relationships between experienced professionals and those who are taking the initial steps in their journey toward building a more inclusive future. I would like to invite you to participate in supporting this work by applying to become either a mentor or a mentee. You can access the applications and learn how to participate by going to joyzabala.com. I look forward to working with you to carry on my mother's work as we endeavor together to put more joy in the world for everyone.
Welcome to Talking with Tech. I'm your host, Rachel Mato, joined as always by Chris Bouguet. And also we have Noah Callan here. Noah, we're so excited to have you here today.
Hi guys, my name is Noah Callan. I am 25 years old, turning 26 in a few weeks. I am the AAC Technology Coordinator at Kids Plus, a children's therapy hub in Geelong, Victoria, Australia. My work includes the delivery of augmentative and alternative communication-related professional development training, including workshops, conferences for users, family members and carers, and allied health professionals. One example is our AAC Connect program that I run alongside my colleagues, Jenna O'Brien and Rachel Harkin, which provides opportunities for people to advance their knowledge of AAC implementation to better support communication and foster more engaging and effective interactions for parents and their children. I should also mention that I do some work that gets skilled access, of which Dylan Orchard, the 2022 Australian of the Year, is the founder. Get Skilled Access is all about encouraging a more inclusive environment for people with disabilities and educating people on how to interact and support someone with a disability, especially in professional settings and when accessing public facilities. I have been involved in both consultation sessions and auditing reviews with ANZ, an Australian bank, and Tennis Australia. Most importantly, helping those clients realize and understand that although I'm non-verbal, I have plenty to say, especially in relation to inclusion and access for those of us who are non-verbal and have quadriplegia. The AAC device that I'm using is Gridpad 12. It is by Smartbox with IntelliGaze camera by ATIA Technologies. Why? The Gridpad 12 has a 10-hour battery life, which means my eye gaze ensures that I can join in the conversation anytime, day or night. It also has a sleek, streamlined design that is the perfect size. It is quite robust and is not too big and not too small. It looks cool as well. It also has an option for a second screen to display what I have typed. It shows the 3 dots when I'm typing my message out. Finally, my Gridpad 12 gives me the ability to set up my environmental controls, which is a very handy feature to have. This is my very first eye gaze system and absolutely has changed my life.
Noah, I am super excited that you shared all about your system because I had mentioned before we started recording, I love that I can also read what you're saying and also that I'm seeing when you're typing and you're formulating. I think that visual feedback is really helpful and I haven't seen that before. And so I'm happy that you kind of discussed that and we talked about it because I feel like it's such a cool feature and it just kind of supports, all different modalities of communication. And it's just, especially I'm guessing in noisy environments where perhaps the auditory output, isn't loud enough. It's that kind of visual piece where people are able to then read what you've communicated in addition to listening.
Those 3 dots, I think, are really important because people are used to seeing a text message and knowing, I have to wait. This is my cue that I need to wait because something's being conferred. And so that 3 dots is just such a great sort of universally understood way of meaning, just give me a second. I'm working on it.
Yeah, which we've had other AAC users on the podcast. And one of the things they say is a challenge is having people wait long enough for them to actually respond and formulate a response. And so I think that's a really cool technology that Smartbox has. So I'm happy that we kind of shared about that. You have a very long resume, sir. You're doing amazing things in the field of advocacy and AAC.
In fact, I thought maybe I heard it wrong. So he said 25, right? Not 55. He's done more. No, you've done more in 25 years than I know some people. Geez. Yes. Amazing.
Super, super impressive. So before we kind of dive into all the current work that you're doing, really curious about your story. How did you first get set up with AAC? When were you introduced to AAC? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
My family and I lived in Japan for 8 years. I can remember at about the age of 3, accessing our laptop to practice writing sentences with only a jelly bean switch. I then discovered the trackball to move the mouse around on the screen with jelly bean switches to do left and right click. Soon after, I discovered a non-screen keyboard that enabled me to move the mouse and click any letter. This enabled me to write messages to my family. Even at such an early age, I could see the power technology could give me in my life. I was also able to play computer games, basic ones, but for the first time in my life, I was able to do something other able-bodied kids could do. After we came back from Japan, my parents placed me in a special school. My speech therapist, Sam, took me out of my class and we went to an office space. I didn't know what she was going to do with me. On the table, there was a device with a jelly bean switch. It was just sitting there. At first, I didn't know what it was. Sam got some tools to mount the green device on my wheelchair's wooden table. She then stuck some Velcro on my table for the switch. I still had no clue what this did. She turned on the machine, and then a lot of small icons came up. The device was called a Minimo and had a small screen. I was interested in what this could do for me. Sam explained how it worked. It was an augmentative and alternative communication AAC device that allowed me to have a voice and output my thoughts and opinions. I used the scanning feature for my access method to select which row or column I wanted to choose. It scanned each row automatically within a few seconds. My setting, I think, was 2 or 3 seconds. When I clicked on the jelly bean switch on the row I wanted, it scanned which column I would like to pick. When I selected the icon, it spoke out to the world. This moment unlocked my voice. One problem with this device was that it couldn't spell. For example, when I spell the word dog, it doesn't say dog. It says D-O-G. This is because someone has to pre-record their voice into the device to say the word. This isn't a computerized voice. It was a shame, but lucky we had a student teacher called Andrew who recorded his voice when I needed a word or two. Or else I would have asked my teacher to record her voice, but I didn't want to sound like a lady, which is fair enough, don't you think? After a few months, Sam gave me an upgrade to the Dynavox MT4, the same as Minimo, but it had a computerized voice and could spell. Learning to use AAC has been challenging at times, but I always got there in the end. I can remember the first night of having it, and Mum was complaining about something, so I simply said, "Who cares?" That comment was the first funny comment I ever made. AAC allows me to show my personality and my crazy humor. From then on, my family and I started to have proper conversations. In all honesty, I didn't know what impact an AAC device was going to have on my life. I only realized how much it could help me just 3 years ago when I got my Gridpad 12 with the eye gaze access. When I left my special school to go to a mainstream school, I also left my speech therapists and teachers who were implementing AAC in my daily life, which means people no longer put this technology in front of my face every single day. I did use AAC in my late high school years. I remember when my year 11 English teacher wanted me to use my AAC to answer questions during class. So before the class, he gave me the questions, which allowed me time to think about them deeply. Using Proloquo by Assistive Wear on my MacBook Pro. This simple strategy enabled me to participate in the discussion. When it was my turn to answer the question, everyone looked at me because they were interested in how this technology works, and they were smiling straight after I had answered the question. It was really important for me to have these opportunities so that both students and teachers could recognize that I was just like anyone else. 4 years ago, I wanted to explore what else was out there, so I reached out to my speech therapist, Sam. By the way, if you need a fantastic speech therapist and you are in Melbourne, Australia, I highly recommend Samantha White Speech Pathology. Anyway, I reached out to her after 10 years to get recommendations on what to use. The Gridpad 12 was the answer, and I now realize how much of an impact that device has had in allowing me to share my thoughts and opinions.
That is an amazing journey that you've been on, Noah. And thank you for kind of sharing all the different systems that you've tried. I think it's a good reminder that these things evolve with the technology, right? And these things evolve over the course of someone's life. And it sounds like you were kind of trialing a lot of different things and deciding what worked for you and also what didn't work for you. And it sounds like you landed on a good system based on the experiences that you were having and finding some of those limitations, especially early on when the technology just wasn't the same as it is now.
Well, and also just reflecting on what you were saying there, it sounds like you've used multiple things, right? So, and your access methodology changed from switches to eye gaze. So I think some people feel like they got to get it right out of the start, and you are certainly sharing experiences where you've grown and evolved over time.
One other thing I want to remark on is the story you shared about the first time you were able to say something funny and humorous, and you were able to showcase the humor that you have. I think that's really important to highlight, because so often I think as therapists and educators, we're trying to get kids to communicate in ways that we expect, that we want. And really, how can we teach students to really start sharing parts of their personality and, saying things that are funny. And I think that was such a great reminder. And obviously it was a really powerful experience for you, because you said it was the first time that I was able to say something funny to my family. And so I just thank you for sharing that. And I think it's just another powerful example of how we can really try to help our students learn how to communicate what they want to communicate, what they're interested in communicating.
Noah, I have to go. Thank you so much for making Rachel text me and go, you got to jump on and meet Noah. So I'm so glad I got to meet you. I do have one last question before I go, though, and I know you're going to continue the interview with Rachel here, and that is, are you still a gamer, man? Are you gaming?
I'm a big gamer, especially Grand Theft Auto.
Awesome. All right, enjoy the rest of the. I'm a gamer too, right? So we've got to connect. Enjoy the rest of the interview. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Nice meeting you.
See you, Chris. All right, Noah, it's back to just us. Okay, so let's see. Where are we on the questions? Okay. So you've shared a lot about your journey, which has been really, exciting to kind of hear all the different phases of AAC that you've gone through. A lot of parents of children who use AAC listen to this podcast. A lot of educators who teach kids how to use AAC listen to this podcast. What advice would you give about AAC, especially to parents perhaps that are just starting off on the AAC journey with their child? Based on all of your experience, what piece of advice would you give?
The first time I used AAC wasn't just a first for me. It was also a first for my parents. The most challenging thing for my parents was them learning how to use the device themselves and how they could best support me. They had to take the time to learn from my speech therapist. I think I have been pretty lucky with my parents, really. They have always been proactive in ensuring that I have access to whatever technologies will work for me. To do that, they have had to keep themselves educated about tech along the way, which is not easy. It meant lots of research, testing out the hardware and software and finding people who could answer their questions. Unfortunately, it isn't always easy to connect with older AAC users because there isn't that many of us. My parents also learned early on to support my humor because they realized how important it was for me. I remember early on the moment that I knew AAC was going to help me. Mum was complaining about something, so I simply said, "Who cares?" with the device I had at the time. That comment was the first funny comment I ever made, and I still remember it to this day. AAC allowed me to show my personality and my crazy humor. From then on, my family and I started to have proper conversations My parents have also empowered me in many ways, often by giving me choices regarding things happening in my life, and they have listened to those choices. This was critical for me to see my voice as valuable and powerful. My parents have been incredible advocates around AAC and my tech setup. I have also taught my extended family how to communicate with me using AAC. My parents were so important to me along my journey, even if I didn't realize it way back then. They have always been there for me and did their very best. If you are a family member, friend, or therapist of an AAC user, try and set a time with the AAC user to have a chat with the device each day. That way, the AAC user gets to know the layout of their grid and feels more at ease with the device, so they will feel comfortable starting their own conversation. If you're an AAC user, keep using your device. Remember, it's your voice and it's going to be part of you. It's important to share your thoughts and opinions. Think that the device is going to be a part of your identity because it is.
I love that. And it sounds like, it's funny because you mentioned about your parents, like maybe back then I didn't realize it, but we always kind of reflect on our parents, right? We're like, when we're teenagers, we're like, oh, our parents. But then, as we become adults, we look back and think, wow, I'm lucky to have the parents that I have. And it sounds like your parents were really big advocates for you getting all of the technology and supports that you needed to be successful. Speaking about that, tell me the most challenging aspect of AAC. We have had a lot of AAC users on the podcast, and it's always a big question for me, just because I think there's no better way to learn about AAC than to listen to AAC users themselves. So tell me, what is the most challenging aspect of being an AAC user?
Using this device does give me a voice, but does come with its challenges. One of the biggest challenges that I have come across is people often want to touch or lean on the device when they are hanging with me and talking to me. I know that they don't mean to cause any problems by doing this, but it is not a good idea. It's a part of my identity, and the person needs to realize that it's like touching me without any warning. Please respect me and the device. And trust me, I'll let them know using my device and it's all good. They could damage the device, cause it to come off the mount and fall, and it is also a bit of an invasion of my personal space. The second challenge is that when I go into a different room, I sometimes need to recalibrate the device. This is because the lighting of the environment can vary from room to room. Light can affect the size of a person's pupils, as you know, which in turn affects how the eye gaze reads my eyes. If it is not right, the system won't read or reads inaccurately. This can be really annoying.
Yeah, those are really important reminders. The first one you mentioned about just kind of not touching my device, I think is a big one. And I feel like, especially with young kids, we're oftentimes taking their device to program and plug it in and model and all those things. And so really respecting that is, a student's voice. And I think you explained it as part of their identity. So always asking permission if we do need to kind of mess around with the device feels like a good kind of thing to remember. And also just recognizing that it's not just simply a device, right? It's a kind of an extension of you, which I think is an important reminder. And then the recalibration specific to the eye tracking and eye gaze system. I think that alternative access, especially eye tracking, does feel like a daunting technology for a lot of SLPs, even AAC specialists. And I think that the environment and the positioning and getting the calibration and the dwell time and all of those things are huge. And you're able to kind of understand that and communicate about that. But I think when we're working with new users and young kids, it's like, oh, it doesn't feel like it's working, or they're inaccurate, and it can just be a technology thing, right? It can be the lighting in the room, like you mentioned. So I think that's a really important reminder, making sure that environmental stuff and all the calibration is kind of dialed in. Okay. Do you have any other stories, Noah, that you'd like to share? You've been doing great at sharing stories of all of your experiences. Do you have any other stories to share?
Two stories that I'm going to share with you today. I'm going to give you a real example of something that happened to me when people don't look past your disability. I went to a bank to set up a business account. The person who was helping us spoke to my support worker, aka Mum, the entire time. This person actually talked about me in front of me rather than to me. Even when my mum kept directing the conversation to me, this person just didn't get it. The worst part was when this person, who was a manager by the way, said, "Can he understand what I am saying?" I was thinking, really? I am right here. I'm using an iPad with switch control. What? Give me a chance to respond. I am aware of what's happening around me, and it's a business account for me, not my mum. This negative experience made me feel somewhat disappointed in both the person we were dealing with and the bank, because they should have had more of an idea of how to deal with a disabled person. It should really be part of their training. I've got feelings too, and I shouldn't be treated this way. I think it is time for change. People need to become more educated around AAC and respect people who have a disability, including those that are nonverbal. To contrast, my next experience is a positive one, and a reminder to never underestimate the power of using an AAC device just in daily life either. Up until a few years ago, I was not able to access an iPhone because the software did not have the accessibility features I needed. Anyway, I worked in consultation with an organization assisting Apple with these features. To cut a long story short, I was finally able to purchase an iPhone. So I went into the store and we worked with Francis, who was helping us with setting up the phone. But he couldn't get the accessibility features working. Sometimes that's technology for you. These features should have been on the phone, but were not there because recent updates for the software had not occurred. Through communication using my eye gaze, he and I were able to help each other get to where I needed it to be. I was able to walk him through the steps necessary to make this happen. Mum couldn't help, so if I hadn't had the means to communicate directly with him, we would have been in trouble. Francis was a great communication partner because he talked directly to me and not to my mum. While setting up my new iPhone, we started to chat about other things and we were able to have a laugh. We connected and it felt great. Francis looked past my disability and my Gridpad. He treated me as a regular customer. I really liked him and I hope that I get to see him again.
Oh, no, I love those stories. The first one, super cringy, right? It just made me go, oh, yuck. Yuck, yuck, yuck. And you're exactly right. It's like, this is where we need organizations to have better education and training around how to engage and interact with people with disabilities. I just also had an aha moment when you were sharing about the experience working with the guy at Apple for the iPhone and the accessibility. I'm sure one of the experiences that you have and many AAC users is when you're meeting a new person, you very rarely probably have an opportunity to just connect with someone, and communicate in ways that are just not beyond the basic needs that I need, right? Like, I'm coming to you because I need to open a bank account and I'm going to tell you the information that you need. And I'm coming to you because I need to buy this iPhone. So here's the information that you need. It's like very transactional, I'm sure, with people that you're just interacting with in the community. But how awesome is it when you meet someone like Francis at the Apple store, where you're able to actually connect with someone new and share your experiences. And so I'm sure that doesn't happen as often as it should. Is that right?
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just, as I was listening to you, I was like, I'm sure that is probably common, unfortunately, to just be like, here's all the information you need. And then our conversation is kind of over at that point. If you were interacting with someone who isn't a good communication partner, who doesn't know how to interact with someone who uses AAC for communication. Okay. So one question that I ask everybody on the podcast who comes on: if you had a billboard that everyone read, what would you want your billboard to say?
Don't underestimate what an AAC user can do. Give them all the time in the world to deliver their message, because what's the rush? There is absolutely no rush. Sometimes people assume that because I have a physical disability and am nonverbal, I can't do things like ordinary people do. Don't judge a person by their appearance. Before you judge a disabled person, you may want to take the time to get to know them and see what they are able to do. You might be surprised and also find a new friend.
Oh, I love that, Noah. And I think it's a really important reminder that wait time is so big, because oftentimes either people, I'm sure, move on when they're having conversations with you and you don't have enough time to respond, or talk for you, which I know is another thing I'm sure you probably experience a lot. And for our students who are learning language using AAC, if we're always jumping in and asking them more questions or telling them what to say, they never have the time and space to actually figure out what they want to say on their own. So I think across the board, awesome billboard. I love it. What is next on the horizon for you? You already have done so much, Noah, in the work that you do, in the advocacy that you do. What are your goals? Tell me all about the things that we have to look forward to for you.
I will keep advocating for people with disabilities and educating people that someone like me can do the same things as an able-bodied person in all aspects of life, like sport, school, work, social, or even dating life. Also, I'd like to keep working with Get Skilled Access and the Kids Plus Foundation so that I can keep raising awareness about augmentative and alternative communication and mentoring the next generation of AAC users to speak up for themselves and be heard. The best place to find what I'm up to is on my Linktree. The link is linktree/Noah Callan. There are a lot of links, including one of my platforms, AAC Space, which acts like yellow pages for AAC devices and speech pathologist services worldwide. If you want to list your listing on AAC Space, please visit aacspace.com. It's absolutely free.
You're an entrepreneur, Noah? Oh my goodness. I feel like we have to have a whole new podcast episode dedicated to talking about your entrepreneurship. I just went to aacspace.com. I want to be on that. I'm going to submit an entry. Can I be on it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you're doing amazing work, both for the field of AAC, but also just generally for people with disabilities. So I thank you so much for coming on to share your experience. You will have to stay in touch. I know we're friends on Instagram now, Noah. So I'm excited to see all the things that you do. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have some new project that you're working on. We would love to share it on the podcast. We'd love to have you come back on and talk all about it. We thank Sam is Sam the one who told you to reach out to us? It was a different SLP.
That was Sam.
It was Sam. Well, I hope to meet Sam one day too, because it sounds like she's doing amazing work for the field and has really impacted your life. And I'm sure many other individuals' lives, connecting them to the technology that can give them a voice. So thank you, Noah, for coming on and sharing your experience with us.
Thanks so much for having me today. It has been great talking with you.
Thank you so much, Noah. So for Talking with Tech, I'm Rachel Mado, joined by Noah Callan. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week.